Good morning again, Sunday School families, and welcome back to another week of virtual Sunday School. I hope you've all had a wonderful week. I'm excited to be back here in our church building. I know the last couple weeks I've been at home, and so I'm really thankful to be back here to see all your beautiful faces on the wall. And this week actually is a special week for our church. This week we celebrate the Reformation. It's Reformation Sunday. And so this week in Sunday School, we're going to talk a bit about what that means and how we can apply that to our own lives. But first, let's pray together using our voices and our bodies. Repeat after me. Loving God, thank you for all that you do. Help me today and all days to love others, as I love myself, the way Jesus taught us. Amen. I bumped the cross a little with my shoulder there. Now you may remember that last week we talked about a time when Jesus taught some Pharisees and he taught us that it's sometimes important to follow the rules of the place in which you live. And that rules are very important because they help us to live healthy and happy lives, and they help us to share God's love with the rest of the world. But this week, we're going to talk about how Jesus calls us to challenge rules sometimes, and to even challenge the authority of people who are telling us to do things or who are doing things that are in fact not sharing God's love with the rest of the world. And it's our job as disciples to do that. We are called to take action when things like that are happening. And this week we're going to talk about a person who did that a very, very, very long time ago. Not as long ago as the life of Jesus, but we're going to talk about a guy called Martin Luther. And he was a follower of Jesus that decided that there were some things that were going on in the church that he didn't think reflected Jesus' greatest commandment of all, that we love the Lord our God with all our hearts and minds and souls, and that we love our neighbors as ourselves. And so we're going to hear a little bit about Martin Luther in this animation film.
A most precise and nuanced look into the life of the man, legend and visionary, Martin Luther. One day, when Luther is 21 years old, he experiences something which will affect him for the rest of his life. Suddenly, a thunderstorm erupts, a wild, violent one. Luther is terrified of being struck by lightning and dying, because all his life he has been told that he must earn a place in heaven when he dies, and he doesn't think he has done that quite yet. So he falls to his knees to pray, not to God, but to Saint Anna, so that she might ask God to look after him. And Luther promised that if God would see him safely through the thunderstorm, he would offer the rest of his life to God by becoming a monk. Luther cannot understand it if God's intention is really for poor people to spend all their money buying their way out of punishment so they can go to heaven. And why should it be easier for the rich to avoid a long time in purgatory than it is for the poor? He thinks it's way too much about money and too little about God when priests sell letters of indulgence with slogans such as, "When the coin in the coffer clings, the soul from purgatory springs." Luther wants to discuss this with other monks and priests, so he writes 95 theses and nails them to the church door in Wittenberg where he lives. The church door, you see, acts as a form of bulletin board and is a completely normal way to put things up for debate. Luther is allowed to defend himself at a trial in the city of Worms. The church hopes that Luther will withdraw what he said and wrote, so that everything can return to normal. But Luther will not. He maintains that if no one can prove him wrong through arguments or quotes from the Bible, he must be right. I cannot, and I will not regret what I have said. I cannot act against my conscience, Luther says. Not many in the audience have heard the word conscience before, but they are in no doubt as to whether Luther stands firm on his beliefs or not. As a result, they declare him an outlaw. This means that anyone now has a duty to catch him and hand him over to the authorities. After Luther has been outlawed, he is forced to hide. He hides in his friend Elector Frederick's castle, Wartburg. Up until then, the Bible has only existed in Greek and Latin. While hiding at Wartburg, Luther translates the entire New Testament into German. Luther wants people to have the opportunity to read the Bible in their own language, so they do not depend on the priests and the church's interpretation. Because Luther sees the Bible as God speaking to all people. When people get access to reading the Bible themselves, they also begin to use the words of the Bible as an argument for all sorts of things. Luther has started something he cannot control. His new thoughts are used as arguments in the power struggles of princes, in revolts, and in the struggle between kings, princes, and the Pope about who actually decides what. Soon, everyone is quarreling and fighting. Some even go to war. Luther had dreamt about changing the church, he knew. But his thoughts ended up splitting the church in two: the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. And that soon becomes important for many other things than the church.
Now, as you can see from that video, Martin Luther was a very important guy, because if Martin Luther hadn't done those things, if he hadn't questioned the way the church was taking money from people, and if he hadn't nailed his 95 Theses onto the door of the church in Wittenberg, we may not have the church that we have today. The Presbyterian Church might not exist at all. And so that's why we celebrate the Reformation, is to celebrate a time in history when the church really made a huge decision to go two separate ways. In some ways, it's a bit sad that the church couldn't stay together and that all Christians couldn't stay together under one church, under one name. But in a lot of ways, this was really important because it encourages us to always be thinking with our own minds and to be loving with our own hearts and to be really thinking to ourselves, is what we're doing in the church and in other places in our lives, is it really what Jesus wants us to do? Is it really what Jesus would do? Are we really loving God through this action? And are we really loving our neighbors when we do these things? Now, we can think of many times in the Bible when Jesus challenged authority, the same way Martin Luther did. When Jesus challenged the rules of the place in which he lived, in the name of loving God and loving one another. Because as he said, that was the greatest rule of all. The most important commandment was love. And now this might be one of our biggest jobs as followers of Jesus. To look around us every day, to see the things that are happening around us every day, and to ask ourselves, using our hearts and our minds and our souls, ask ourselves, is what I see happening following the commandment of love? And if it's not, what can I do? How can I take action as a follower of Jesus and make sure that love is happening in this way? Now, I can think of a few ways that this is happening right now in today's world. You may have heard that in Nigeria, there have been protests because the people are upset that there's a special police force that is actually hurting people more than they're helping people. And so the people of Nigeria, many of them Christians and some of them not, are saying, that what I see happening with SARS, this special police team, is not following the commandment of love. And so the people of Nigeria and people from all around the world are seeing this take place, and they're standing up with their hearts and their minds and their souls, and they're saying this is enough. Another more local example is Camp Pekawewin. Now, a lot of people realized, and they were thinking, and they saw that the government in Edmonton was not doing enough to help those who are homeless. And so a bunch of people gathered together and they decided to create Camp Pekawewin, a safe place for people who don't have homes to come and sleep and to eat and to pray together. Now, we know from stories in the Bible that there were times that Jesus was laughed at or mocked or disliked because of his ideas, because of his actions, and because he stuck so fiercely to the rule of loving God and loving one another, and that those were the two most important things. And I'm sure Martin Luther faced some backlash as well. People didn't like him for his ideas, and that might have been lonely or painful for Martin Luther at times. But what's so amazing about God's love is that it's stronger than everything else. It will never, ever fail us. That's why knowing about God's love is sort of like a superpower. And that's why a lot of followers of Jesus are just bursting at the seams to share God's love with others, because they know that once others feel God's love, their lives will be changed too.